Jets owner Woody Johnson spoke to the media on Monday at the NFL owners meetings in Orlando, Florida. That can only mean one thing. We have ridiculous Woody Johnson comments to break down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, March 26th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Well, Jets owner Woody Johnson made his first public comments in over a month on Monday. We're going to break down what he had to say on today's show. And if you listened to what Woody had to say yesterday and compared it with what he said the last time he spoke in public at the NFL Honors Award show, you might be a little confused because there were quite a few contradictions. And this shows you why you can't really take anything Woody says seriously, because I don't think Woody Johnson really has any core beliefs. I don't think he understands anything about running an NFL team. I think so much of what he says and so much of what he does is just purely reactionary. You may remember when Woody spoke at the NFL Honors Award show, he took quite a bit of criticism. He took some criticism from me, and I think it was fair. He came out and essentially blamed all of the Jets' 2023 struggles on Zach Wilson, which was ridiculous on a couple of levels. It wasn't that Zach Wilson played well. It wasn't that Zach Wilson was having a successful career. Zach Wilson's been a major disappointment. But first of all, Zach Wilson was not the only problem with the team a year ago. Second, and probably the bigger issue, Woody acted like he had nothing to do with the selection of Zach Wilson as the backup quarterback, because back right before the Super Bowl at the NFL Honors show, what Woody said was, we didn't have a backup quarterback last year. That's why we failed. As though the owner of the team, the guy who was the driving force behind the Jets getting Aaron Rodgers, had nothing to do with the quarterback situation. It was like Woody trying to pass blame along. Woody took a lot of criticism for it. So in Woody's mind, what I need to do next time is just say the exact opposite. If I took criticism for saying one thing, I'll say the exact opposite thing the next time. And that way people will praise me. You know, there's no context. The context, it wasn't that necessarily that Woody said anything that was necessarily incorrect about Zach Wilson. It's just the total context of the situation. But I don't think Woody understands that. I think Woody's mindset was, well, last time I got criticized for criticizing Zach Wilson, so now I'll say something good about Zach Wilson. And what he said is that, the Jets are obviously having some issues trading Zach Wilson. The market has not developed for him the way the Jets were hoping. And look, it's going to be tough to trade Zach Wilson. New team has to take on about $5 million, which is a lot for a quarterback of Zach Wilson's caliber. If you look, Justin Fields, a quarterback who's better, only got a 6th-round pick, a conditional 6th-round pick in a trade, which means a quarterback who's not as good like Zach Wilson, it's going to be tough to deal him. What he said was, Zach Wilson is not going to be cut if the Jets can't trade him. And he used the phrase, he's a valuable asset. So not that long ago, right before the Super Bowl, less than 2 months ago, his last public appearance, Woody Johnson said Zach Wilson was not good enough to be a backup quarterback, but now he's a valuable asset. Welcome to the world of Woody Johnson. And this is why you can't take anything the guy says seriously, because I don't think he believes anything. I think he just says what he thinks the fans want to hear. And because he got so much criticism last time, he just decided, I'm going to say the opposite this time. And this is all in the context. There are some reports that Woody Johnson's vetoing trades, which I don't know if they're true or not. I tend to not believe those reports. But yeah, Woody just comes out and says, Zach Wilson's a valuable asset. I would love to hear the follow-up question of, well, why did you say we didn't have a backup quarterback before? And I think part of it's, last time when Woody said that, the Jets were in the beginning stages of trying to trade him. It doesn't help the player's trade value if the owner goes out and says, this guy's no good. That's what Woody did. I don't know how much of an impact it made, but it certainly did not help the Jets trying to trade Zach Wilson when the owner goes out and says, he's not good enough to be a backup quarterback. So Woody trying to backpedal a little bit, but obviously too little too late on that front. Another interesting thing is last time at the NFL Honors, Woody kind of laid down the gauntlet for the people running the Jets. He said, we need to do better. We need to win now, which was in contrast to what he had said Christmas Eve when he brought back Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh and made excuses for them. At the NFL Honors, he said, we need to win now. We need to make it happen. There's urgency. Well, Woody walked that back on yesterday as well. He was asked what will make a successful Jets season, and I'll read you the full quote. What would make a successful Jets season? Quote, it's in the eye of the beholder. You want to feel like you're getting the most out of your players. You're winning or close to winning every single game. I think last year, despite not having an offense, we were in there for a lot of games. If we had a modicum of offense, which I think we'll have more than a modicum of offense, we have a good receiver in Mike Williams. We have Garrett Wilson. He's probably the best receiver in the league. Great running back. We're going to have a good line. We'll have a quarterback that's going to be on his feet. All you have to do with Aaron is tell the receiver to count to 10, put your hands out there. He apparently stuck his hands out. Look around, and the ball will be in your hands. That's what happens. End quote. This is the man who's in charge of the Jets. I mean, let's look. I mean, how much can you break down there? The Jets have loaded up this roster. They've traded for a quarterback who's now 40 years old. They've added a bunch of players in their 30s. They've pushed dead money to the future. They're all in. What would be successful? Well, the owner tells you it's in the eye of the beholder. We don't need to win games. We just need to be close. This is, again, I want to make sure I'm not misquoting him. This is the exact quote. You're winning or close to winning every single game. Close to winning. That's what Woody Johnson now believes is the right path for the New York Jets. That's success for the New York Jets in 2024. You get Aaron Rodgers, not to win the Super Bowl, not to have a deep playoff run, not even to make the playoffs. You get Aaron Rodgers to be close in games. And this is, again, why you cannot take this guy seriously, but also why it's kind of terrifying that he's running the team, going off and saying these things. And look, most owners don't really have a great grasp of football. You know, they've been successful in other fields. And that's, you know, they made enough money to buy a team because they're successful in other fields of business. But my goodness, I don't know that you're going to hear any other owner saying that. I mean, calls Garrett Wilson the best receiver in the NFL. Look, I love Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's the man. Garrett Wilson's not the best receiver in the NFL. Or I think the ultimate quote is, all you have to do with Aaron is tell the receiver to count to 10, put your hands out there, look around, and the ball will be in your hands. As you may know, NFL passing plays are very timing based. It's, you know, it's like certain 1, 2, 3, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know how long Woody Johnson thinks that the Jets offensive line is going to protect Aaron Rodgers, but for Woody, apparently the timing plays are count to 10, not count to 3, count to 10. Just truly unbelievable comments. And, you know, it's not going to impact the Jets on the field, of course, but you have to laugh a little bit at the absurdity of what the owner's going out there saying. And, you know, the Jets PR people just ought to pull Woody aside and say, no more speaking to the public. Next time you speak to the public, just announce we're selling the team. Because every time he speaks to the public, he says stuff like this. And first of all, it's at 180 degrees with what he just said less than 2 months ago. Zach Wilson 2 months ago wasn't good enough to be a backup quarterback. Now he's a valuable asset. 2 months ago, we needed to make it happen now. Now, success is in the eye of the beholder. We're trying to be close in games. You know, Woody, just please stop talking. Please. On behalf of your PR staff, enough of this. And, you know, fortunately, it's not going to impact the Jets on the field this year, but it is a little disturbing that this is the man in charge of the overall direction of the franchise, because what he's saying, I mean, this is like stuff the average fan would know is not really very valuable insight. And this is the man who's in charge of the operation. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll keep talking about Woody because he said something else. And he said something that I just don't think adds up. It's about the way the fans were treated. It's about the reason the team raised ticket prices. And we'll go into that as we continue on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. You know you should not have to worry when you buy tickets to the next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. I've used Gametime plenty myself. It's really easy to use, and you find amazing deals. And hey, the Jets did raise ticket prices this year. We're going to go into Woody Johnson's explanation as we continue on this show, but if you don't want to pay those sky high prices, go to Gametime to buy Jets tickets. It's a great place to get all the tickets you need, and not just for sports, for music, comedy, theater, anything near you. Go to Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. Are you tired of watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today on Locked On Jets, we're breaking down some stuff the owner had to say yesterday. Woody Johnson, gracing us once again with his football insights. And I'll reiterate this: Jets PR staff, please stop letting him speak in public. But he said something about ticket prices. Now, in case you missed this, the Jets raised their ticket prices for 2024. And based on the season they had in 2023, you got to be scratching your head a little bit. And I think what happened is obvious. They decided in advance they were raising ticket prices, and they thought Aaron Rodgers would have a good season. They'd be able to justify it. Well, they did not have a good season, and fans are pretty upset about it, and understandably so. I mean, this is not a Jets problem. The Jets are not responsible for this, but if you look across the NFL and look across major pro sports, regular fans are being priced out. Very difficult. It's almost like a lot of people, it's like you have to take out a mortgage to take your family to a game, and that's unfortunate. And again, that's not a Jets phenomenon. That's like every team, but at the same time, a team that has the season like the Jets had in 2023, and they raised their ticket prices, it deserves a little bit of scrutiny. Woody Johnson provided us with his insight on this. This is, again, I'm going to quote him directly so that you can't say I'm misquoting him. The direct quote, as transcribed by reporters who were there: "The cost of doing business has gone up. That's just an unfortunate fact of life now. It's not something we like to do, that's for sure. We work for the fans, so we listen to them. We'll try to get you some wins." I mean, I'm going to repeat that because I don't think that may not have sunk in the first time. So let me repeat that. The cost of doing business has just gone up. That's an unfortunate fact of life now. It's not something we like to do, that's for sure. We work for the fans, so we listen to them. We'll try and get you some wins. Well, thank you for listening to the fans, Woody, because the fans, I'm sure the fans told you, raise ticket prices off the 2023 season you just had. Just really great show of goodwill to your fan base. And by the way, the Jets also forced their season ticket holders to get their deposits in early this year. It was like November, December that season ticket holders had to send in their deposits. And part of that, I would imagine, is the Jets wanted to make sure the season tickets deposits were in case Rodgers decided to retire in the offseason. So, nice move there. Woody says we're listening to the fans. And Woody talks to the cost of business is going up like he's some mom and pop shop on Main Street. This is so much tougher to do business right now. All right, here are the facts of the situation. Because I really want to lay this out, because I think this has not gotten the level of attention it deserves, these comments, and I think that there are some real holes that can be poked in what Woody just said here. First of all, the biggest cost of business the NFL has are the player salaries. Those are based on the revenue you get. So the more you raise ticket price, it's not that salaries are driving ticket prices. Ticket prices are driving salaries, because the salary cap is set based on the revenue the team makes, not the other way around. So that's number one. Number two, the NFL is making so much money. I mean, come on. And I understand. Look, supply and demand, all that stuff. I understand. People are willing to pay the price. That's fine. That would be a more honest answer for what he was saying. That supply and demand, people are willing to pay prices for these tickets, so we're going to raise them. We're going to try and make more money. But what are you acting like? We can't afford to run the team. That's ridiculous. The cost of business is going up. It's supply and demand. And if Woody said that, I'd at least have more respect for him, because he'd be honest there. Say people are willing to pay it, so we're going to try and make more money. This isn't the Jets are in danger of shutting down because of higher costs of operation. Here's the third thing, though. This is the real issue with what he said, where he talks about how this an unfortunate fact of life that the cost. He says the cost of business is going up. The Jets tickets, the sales that they make, are subject to revenue sharing. That's true of all 32 teams. Of the ticket sales the Jets have, they keep 60% of the proceeds. The other 40% is shared equally among the teams. And that's true of every team. So if you're an NFL team, you keep 60% of ticket sales you make, but the rest is all divided equally. The other 40% just goes into a big pot, and the league distributes it equally. And that's, part of the reason the NFL has the equal structure it's got. It's not just the salary cap, it's the fact that teams share revenues equally. It's also the national TV deal, but we'll get to that in a second. So the idea that the Jets need to raise ticket prices to compete with everybody else, well, just under half the money is divided equally when we talk about team ticket sales. So the Jets are raising money, but it's also making money for the other teams as well. And the Jets, if the Jets kept their ticket prices stable, it would impact the other teams just as much as it impacts them. Also, the NFL revenue is driven in the NFL by TV. That's the number one. That's where the league makes over half of its revenue, according to estimates. And the TV deal that the NFL is on is going to roughly double the revenue that the league makes over the last TV deal. The new TV deal just kicked in this past season, and it'll last for a decade. The league will double its revenues from TV over that course of time. So, what do you like out here? And I don't want to say, I think it would be fair. It would not be fair to say he was crying poverty, but what are you acting like? We have to do this. It's just, well, our business will fall behind. It's ridiculous. And again, if Woody goes out and says it's supply and demand, the fans are willing to pay for it, fine. That's an honest answer. But what are you acting like? Oh, we're listening to the fans. We just can't. We can't afford. Our fans are telling us, when we listen to the fans, our fans are telling us we want higher ticket prices, or we just can't afford to do business. That to me just doesn't pass the smell test. Just be honest, Woody. And again, let's look at the facts here. First of all, the costs of the league are driven by revenues. The player salaries go up based on how much revenue you make. The player salaries aren't driving the ticket prices. The ticket prices are driving the player salaries. Second, the Jets are in pretty good shape financially. And third, this money is subject to revenue sharing. Fourth, most of the revenue the league generates is through the TV deal. So, what he just like, I don't know what he's trying to accomplish by saying that, by pretending like they're not just trying to raise the prices on the fans, like the team's trying to do something to prevent it. Look, you raise the prices, Woody. Take it for once. I guess that we've talked about my issues with Woody Johnson. Like, this is kind of crystallizes some of the frustrations that I have with him. It's just the total lack of accountability from ownership on anything. When we talk about player moves, we talk about the team's results, or even something as simple as ticket prices. You raise the ticket prices, Woody. Own it. Actually offer a real explanation. Don't pretend you're doing this for the fans. Anyway, end of rant. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to some actual football stuff. At the league's owners meetings, there was a pretty big rule change that came into play. We're going to see a different type of NFL, especially on the defensive side in 2024. I'll explain what that is, and I'll explain why I think some of the reactions are maybe going a little bit overboard to it. That's as we continue this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And yeah, I know there's a pretty good chance that your bracket is busted. I've been there plenty of times in the past. It always feels like by the end of the first weekend, I've lost a bunch of my Final Four teams. Maybe you pick Kentucky to go a long way. I was giving some people some advice to pick Kentucky to go a long way. Sorry, folks. Well, now because of FanDuel, you don't have to worry if your bracket's busted. You can still get in on the action. Again, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We've been talking about all of the insight Woody Johnson provided us yesterday. My goodness. Joe Douglas also spoke with the media. He didn't really say a whole lot. On yesterday's show, we talked about what Robert Saleh said. Saleh had a couple interesting nuggets. I don't think Douglas gave us a whole lot. I mean, the one thing that was kind of interesting that Douglas said was he talked about being a really good offensive line class. Now, that might just be GM speak, or it might be some insight into Douglas thinking like they can find some players later on in the draft for the offensive line. But Douglas kind of held his cards close to the vest, as one would expect a GM to do at this point in time. Probably the biggest news out of the NFL owners meetings from Monday is a rule change. And this is a controversial change because a lot of the players did not want it. The hip drop tackle has been outlawed by the NFL. And if you're not familiar with it, you can watch videos. Essentially, it's just kind of driving a player to the ground, hip first. And there's a lot of consternation over this. Your typical complaints is that we're turning it into flag football. We've been hearing that one a whole lot. Players don't like it. Fans are concerned. And look, here are the things that I'll say about this. Number one, if you look at the history of the NFL, and this goes back over a century, there have been two things that have been pretty constant. One is the league looks for ways to increase offense. This is true. This has been true. You can go back again. You can go back a century. Go back more than a century. professional football, they're trying to figure out ways to produce more offense. And, there are lots of fans who say they prefer defense, but the numbers don't lie. The more offense there is, the more fans are interested in. I'm not saying, look, there are some fans who appreciate good defense. There are some fans who love a slugfest, a low scoring game, a 6-3 kind of game where defenses are dominating, but more fans like offense. So that's number one. Number two, another thing that's been consistent for like a century. Whenever a rule change is made, fans are angry and fans say, this isn't like the game. This isn't, they're trying to take the physicality out of the game. Football was football 20 years ago. I remember when I was growing up, this was, 30 years ago. It was in the 90s. People were complaining the game wasn't as tough as it was in the 60s. And now people are looking back in nostalgia with the 90s saying that was real football. This is just one of those things. I feel like it just goes on. Maybe it's a generational thing where people always like romanticize the past and act like the past was so much better than the present. In some ways, maybe it was, but in other ways, it's not. The game will survive. Here's the other thing. Now, I know players are concerned about this. I think the complaint the players have more seriously because these are the guys that are on the field. But typically, when a rule change like this comes into play, you see this over and over. I mean, you saw this, about 10, 11 years ago when they really started to emphasize pass interference. You saw it about 19 years ago when they outlawed the horse collar tackle. There's always concern that like it's going to impact the players, but here's the thing: players are resilient, coaches are smart, and what eventually what happens is coaches figure out new ways to teach techniques, coaches figure out ways to work around it, and players adjust. And I've seen some suggestions that teams will now maybe try and use more rugby style tackling. There are different tackling techniques you can utilize, and yet it'll be an adjustment. But here's the other thing I'll say. I also think back to a few years back when the NFL decided to make pass interference reviewable, where they decided teams could challenge pass interference calls. And I think the officials saw it wasn't really working. So in like the doomsday break glass scenario where this becomes a huge problem, what will happen is probably what happened with those reviews on the pass interference calls. And if you don't remember, what happened was the officials said it wasn't working. So we reached a point in that season where the officials just refused to overturn any pass interference calls, where they essentially pretended it wasn't part of the rule book. And what happened, the NFL eventually caved and they made pass interference non-reviewable. So if this becomes that big of an issue, and I don't think it will, because again, players learned new techniques. Yeah, it's going to be an adjustment, but players eventually adapt. It happened with the horse collars. It happened through the outlawing of head-to-head stuff. It's happened through roughing the passer being emphasized when it comes to quarterbacks being hit. Players eventually adapt. And yeah, maybe it looks a little shaky like the first couple of games of the preseason, maybe like even like September, October, you don't really know what's going on, but players eventually figure it out and the officials eventually find the balance. But if it gets to the point where it's really obstructing the game, I'm going to fast forward you and tell you what's going to happen. The officials will eventually just decide that they're going to just interpret it in a way that it's not going to impact the game, where they'll just stop calling it. So I understand the concern. There's always concern when there's a major rule change like this, but I think it's going to be okay. I think the game of football will survive. The one thing that's constant about the NFL is that you see drastic rule changes, probably more than in any other sports. Other sports they make some tweaks here or there, and over the last couple of years, maybe some of the other leagues have made more drastic changes. But the NFL, the one thing that's been constant in this league is that there's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of evolution since the league kicked off over a century ago. And the other thing that's constant is that players adapt and the league survives and the league continues to thrive. So if you're concerned about all of this, don't be concerned. Be concerned about what, and don't be overly concerned about what Woody Johnson says, because again, I don't think anybody should take seriously what he's got to say at this point. So just relax. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow, we're going to have our weekly Locked On Jets mailbag.